Ash drifted like tired snowflakes through a sky the color of rust, settling on the broken bones of what had once been a freeway cloverleaf. The concrete curves still grasped at one another, skeletal arms locked forever in an embrace interrupted by catastrophe. In the hush of dawn, their echoes lingered, ghost cars, ghost voices, ghost lives. James Holloway felt them all while he crouched beside the half-collapsed guardrail, gauging wind direction with the back of his hand. When the breeze flowed from the north, it carried seaborne chemicals, and his lungs burned for hours afterward. Today it crept from the east, fetid with marsh gases but free of halogen sting. He allowed himself a single, silent breath of relief. 8 steps behind, Eli copied his father's gesture, small palm extended, hair falling over the goggles too large for his face. The boy's breath coalesced into quicksilver plumes before the wind shredded them. James turned, placed a finger to his lips, then pointed to the ground. "Wait. Listen." The world was full of noises that refused to be seen, the burrow hiss of sinkholes, the pad of feral dogs, the brittle clatter of glass shards knocked loose by temperature swings of 90 degrees in a single afternoon. Eli nodded, shifting his worn backpack, once fluorescent orange, now scabbed with soot and patches of duct tape. Silence endured. The only movement was Ash trying to look like snow. When James was certain nothing hunted them, he rose, checking the revolver at his hip. 6 rounds left, plus 1 cylinder of rusted curiosities he'd never dare fire. Behind him, Eli carried the spare ammunition in a child-size thermos decorated with faded cartoon astronauts. The lid no longer sealed. On cold nights, the boy pressed it against his ear, listening to the rattling cartridges the way other children had once listened to seashells. They advanced along the cracked span, boots crunching through frost-webbed crevices. Beneath the overpass, a lagoon spread where a city interchange had drowned. Black water lapped at the green algae hides of sunken sedans. An egret stood sentinel on a mangled stoplight, feathers stained nicotine yellow by chemicals conjured when the bombs fell. Eli watched the bird as if it held a secret map. He whispered, "Do they ever leave?" James shook his head. These days few creatures bothered with migrations. There were no safe latitudes left to fly toward. At the far end of the interchange, the roadway disintegrated, swallowed by a sinkhole exhaling methane like a wounded titan. James and Eli skirted its rim and descended into what the father's cracked atlas labeled Edgewater Subdivision. The cartographer had drawn the place in soft suburban grays. Now it lay mired in swamp brine, roofs peaking like stepping stones across a feverish sea. From one such roof a makeshift flag waved, a sheet painted with a red handprint, and James's stomach tightened. Signals could be welcomes or warnings, usually they were both. He led Eli along the saddleback of a toppled pine. At midpoint, the trunk buckled under their combined weight and groaned accusations over the water. A porch jutted nearby, tacked to a brick bungalow whose ground floor had vanished beneath the tide. James hopped the final distance, landing in a crouch, ready. No sound inside. The front door was gone, but a curtain made from braided plastic bags dangled where it had once hung. He parted it carefully and ushered Eli in. The interior smelled of brackish mildew. Barnacles clung to the kitchen backsplash, gleaming in shafts of light that cut through holes in the ceiling. Someone had lived here not long ago. A pot with desiccated beans still occupied the stove. A wax paper notebook lay on the countertop, pages fused into an unreadable chrysalis. James checked corners first, then the stairwell. Water reached halfway up the first flight, second story dry. He nodded toward the steps. Eli followed, waterlogged with sighing beneath. Upstairs they found a child's bedroom whose walls had once been a nebula of glow-in-the-dark constellations. Most had peeled off tiny galaxies adrift on the current below, but the paint retained faint luminance. Eli pressed a fingertip to one star, and in that dim light his eyes widened with something approaching peace. James knelt, rummaging through a storage trunk warped by humidity. Blank coloring books, a cracked VR visor, a music box shaped like a mechanical owl. Useless weight. Then, at the bottom, he discovered a half-pack of water-eyed tablets sealed in foil. He exhaled gratitude, fear, everything at once. Each tablet filtered a liter, each liter bought another sunset with his son. He slipped the pack into his coat lining and zipped it shut before Eli noticed. Later, they sat together beside the open window, sharing a breakfast of freeze-dried lentils reconstituted in tepid rainwater. Outside, the swamp lapped at rotted clapboard, rhythm steady as a heartbeat. Eli asked, "Is this the ocean?" The boy had never seen the real thing. Coastlines were vapor, rumored to lie beneath new continents of plastic bergs. James shook his head. "Just leftovers," he said. He considered adding more, about how the water table rose after the blasts, how glaciers dumped their guts into every basin, how the jet stream strayed like a lurching drunk and never found its way back. But he heard his late wife's voice cautioning that Eli deserved stories, not lectures. So James spoke instead of the old world, piecing together fragile anecdotes as delicately as birds weave twigs, summers at Lake Superior when cedars still smelled green, autumn ball games in stadiums larger than any crater. Sidewalks alive with song from buskers wielding steel drums and holographic loops. Eli listened the way parched earth listens for rain, but eventually he asked why those places were gone. James weighed the honesty each year of fatherhood had carved into him and gave it plain. We thought we could bend everything to our purpose and nothing would break. Eli considered this, then pointed toward the drowned subdivision. It broke. James nodded. Late afternoon, wind pivoted, a chemical breeze resumed its reign. Static fizzed across the Geiger patch sewn to James's sleeve, amber lights strobing like tiny suns. He snapped his filter mask down, gestured for Eli to follow. They descended the stairs, wading knee-deep through the first-floor tide. Outside, as they shoved away on a makeshift raft salvaged from closet doors, the red-handed flag flapped above the roofs. Beneath it, a figure emerged, gaunt woman, rifle slung across her chest, hair tied with copper wire. She didn't raise the weapon, she merely watched their silent departure. James met her gaze, and in that brittle moment 2 tribes of wanderers exchanged the one resource neither could keep, hope, before currents carried them apart. Night found father and son pushing inland along an old freight line overtaken by thorn bush and clonal birch. The rails were warped but still navigable, a path to higher ground where poisons pooled less densely. They marched until the sky shed its rusty mask for a different terror, auroras of electric green and ultraviolet that scrawled across the stratosphere, vestiges of magnetosphere wounds torn decades earlier. The lights rippled like curtains in a furnace wind. Eli stared in rapture. "It's pretty," he said, voice muffled by mask. James nearly said beautiful, but beauty felt like a wager he couldn't afford. Radiation levels climbed at midnight, and they trudged beneath invisible lashes, praying the exposure would remain sublethal. Near the burned-out hull of a commuter train, they made camp. James hammered broken rail spikes into the ground to form a perimeter and strung tin can alarms between them. From his pack he removed a cube no larger than a finger joint, cracked it in 2, and shook out gray powder, heat-reactive meal bars. They ate in silence, chewing chalky squares that tasted faintly of licorice and petroleum. Overhead the auroras sharpened, colors neon enough to cut through eyelids. James pressed his palm to Eli's forehead, 80 a fill ever since they'd encountered a fever tribe months earlier. Temperature normal. The boy rolled into his father's arms, exhaustion stealing him mid-sentence. But James remained awake. Memory stalked him, patient as wolves. He recalled the final hours of civilization, sirens wailing across cities while global leaders insisted diplomacy still breathed, the first detonation televised like a carnival sunrise, the dominoes of reactors going critical as grids collapsed. Deadman switches fulfilling their names. He remembered Carrie, his wife, straining to secure Eli's booster seat while the sky mushroomed west of their hometown. The shockwave broken glass, the car door jammed, Carrie refusing to leave, forcing James to rip Eli free and run. Her silhouette burning onto his retina each time lightning now flashed. A metallic clink jolted him. The tin can alarms. He eased Eli aside and unslung the revolver. From the tree lean emerged a form, quadrupedal, roughly canine but taller than a wolf. Fur peeled in patches, one eye glowed where radiation had eaten the lid. The creature sniffed the air, hackles bristling. James leveled the gun. A single shot would echo for kilometers, inviting everything. But fortune hobnobbed with folly, the distant crack of lightning spooked the beast, and it retreated into night, limbs stuttering like faulty servos. Only then did James realize he had stopped breathing. He forced air in, slow, controlling the tremor. Beside him Eli stirred, mumbling about birds made of glass. James stroked the boy's shoulder until sleep reclaimed him. Dawn would come in 6 hours, the track would lead them toward the Appalachian Greenbelt, rumored sanctuary. Rumors, he mused, were simply maps sketched by desperation, but they were all he had. Morning bled through a jaundiced haze. Father and son resumed their pilgrimage, weaving beneath overpasses bristling with stalactites of rusted rebar. They passed a convoy of tankers overturned and split open like metallic sea pods, their cargo hardened into tar dunes that shimmered under stray sunbeams. Eli paused to trace a finger along the tanker's embossed letters, Corvus Energy. He asked what it was. Fuel that never loved the world back, James answered, then regretted the bitterness. They entered the foothills by midday. Hirish gave way to tundra, moss sprouting between soccer ball-sized hailstones from last week's storm. Snow lay in pockets, older than Eli himself, preserved by lethally altered albedo. James's Geiger patch quieted, altitude granted them reprieve. They broke for lunch beneath a radio tower bent at its midpoint like a supplicant. As they chewed the final crumbs of licorice petroleum bars, James spotted glyphs spray-painted on the tower base, a spiral intersected by an arrow. Beneath, stenciled words in faded teal, "Shelter 43 kilometers west." His pulse quickened. For months travelers had spoken of an enclave called Meridian Station nested in caverns beneath a decommissioned observatory. Self-sustaining hydroponics, a geothermal bore, and air scrubber array cannibalized from orbital debris. A fortress of science. 43 kilometers, 2 days march if terrain allowed. He showed Eli the message. The boy's irises, once hazel, had acquired a ring of cobalt from chronic low-dose cesium. Those unusual eyes widened now, reflecting the possibility of permanence. Wind gusted through the tower lattice, resonating like cathedral organs. James felt the vibration in his molars, and the memory of his late father, an acoustics engineer, rose unbidden. Everything hums its own death song, but harmony is the plea for longer living. James looked at his son and chose to believe the world still hummed a chord they could sing along to. They headed west. Terrain punished each step. Limestone ridges crumbled underfoot, dislodging shale slides that thundered into ravines. Eli slipped once, grazing his knee, blood beaded bright against the pallid landscape. James sterilized the cut with iodine distilled from seaweed one winter on the coast. He imagined Meridian Station's infirmary, real bandages, antibiotics, maybe even a vaccine lab. He dared himself to picture electricity humming through hallways, lights bright enough to banish these endless auroras for a while. At sunset they reached a valley marred by thermal vents belching obsidian smoke. The ground radiated heat like an open kiln, snowmelt dripped from overhanging ledges, sizzling into fissures. The air smelled of brimstone and ozone. James and Eli skirted the vents, following cairns made from scavenged surveyor stakes. Someone wanted newcomers to find their way or lured them. But suspicion is a luxury measured against hunger, and the father deemed the equation acceptable. Night arrived abrupt and windless. They sheltered beneath a rock overhang, warmth from the vents puffing rhythmically. James studied the stars, those not masked by radiation curtains, calculating bearings the way his grandfather once taught him on a peaceful back porch. Yet the constellations had drifted, climate-driven precession and orbital debris made maps unreliable. Still, Polaris held its post. North was north and Meridian lay west of it. He traced imaginary lines, quietly thanking the stubborn star for not abandoning them. Eli shivered despite geothermal heat. Fever? James pressed his lips to the boy's scalp. Temperature seemed punctual. Still, he sang a lullaby, fragment of an old folk tune about sailing ships and coral bells. The melody fractured in his dust-scoured throat, but Eli smiled before surrendering to sleep. James watched the boy's chest rise and fall, each inhale proof against oblivion. Then, from the ridge above, a beam of light stabbed the dark, narrow, amber, artificially steady. It tracked across the valley floor, hesitated, reversed. Searchlight! James's pulse hammered. He extinguished their glow stick, dragging Eli deeper under the overhang. He smelled ozone anew, but no thunder rolled. The beam widened, scanning for heat signatures. A drone? A rifle-mounted spotlight? He recalled stories of reclaimer caravans, zealots dedicated to restarting the old economy by reclaiming humans as labor. Or perhaps Meridian scouts defending their threshold, wary of strangers. The beam vanished as abruptly as it appeared. Silence surged back, louder than any siren. James waited long minutes before exhaling, though his hand never left the revolver grip. Eli stirred, asked if morning had come. James lied, soon, and held him until the tremor in his own limbs quieted. Before dawn they climbed out of the valley, legs numb from crouched vigil. The eastern horizon glowed a muted vermilion. At the crest, James paused, scanning with battered binoculars. Beyond rolling fog he glimpsed a structure protruding from forest canopy, a domed silhouette like an eye half-open to the poison sky. Could be the observatory. He knelt beside Eli. Almost there, he whispered. The words felt too generous, but hope's arithmetic required exaggeration to balance despair. Eli nodded, face chalky beneath goggles, but his eyes alighted with resolve. The boy's courage, James realized, no longer stemmed solely from paternal example. It had ossified within him, a marrow forged by catastrophe. They descended into a damp hollow where ancient pines stood skeletal yet stubborn, needles replaced by resilient moss that glowed faintly with bioluminescent bacteria. Thick strands draped the branches, casting an undersea aura. Footsteps muffled by spongy loam, they advanced in reverent quiet, as though trespassing a temple erected by microorganisms. Midway through the grove, Eli froze. He pointed at a trunk where crude letters were carved, "Turn back, sickness ahead." Beneath, a newer inscription overlapped the warning, lines bold and sure, "Stay the course, cure within." James felt the tug-of-war inside his chest. People had left messages like breadcrumbs, each contradicting the last. Truth was a currency too unstable to trust. A twig snapped behind them. James pivoted. A man stood 10 paces away, draped in patchwork radiation armor fashioned from scavenged drone panels. The stranger's face was hidden behind a respirator with ruby-tinted lenses, voice filtered metallic. "We saw your camp." "Hands where I can see." James raised the revolver, barrel angled skyward. "Easy," he said. "Just moving through." The man motioned with a compact flechette rifle. "Moving where?" James gestured west. The stranger exhaled, static crackle through mask. "Meridian sealed. Accept screening or turn around." James swallowed. "My son, 8 years old. We need safe passage." The man tilted his head, lenses reflecting aurora ghosts. "Rules are rules. Contagion doesn't care about innocence." He extended a metallic wand. "Hold still." James considered gambling on 6 bullets, but his son's heartbeat against his leg anchored him to sanity. He lowered the gun, slipped it into his coat. The stranger stepped forward, scanned them with the wand, an ultraviolet detector perhaps, or chemical sniffer. It emitted 3 rapid chirps. The man nodded. "Low readings. You can continue." Relief thundered through James until the man added, "But screening's provisional. You'll be tested again at the perimeter. If levels spike, they'll cleanse you." He mimmed a blade across his throat. James hugged Eli closer, thanking the man with a nod. The stranger turned away, melting into bioluminescent haze. Moments later, the forest swallowed all trace, leaving father and son with the wrong kind of quiet, the kind that wonders what price mercy truly commands. They resumed westward, steps heavier yet quicker. Above the canopy, the observatory dome loomed larger, ribs of weathered aluminum catching stray aurora light. Each kilometer gained, James ticked off in his mind like rosary beads, distance subtracting from the miracles still required. He felt a hum underfoot, machinery perhaps, or merely his own blood singing. When the sun finally pierced the smog at zenith, they crested a ridge and beheld Meridian Station. The observatory perched atop basalt cliffs, dome cracked but scaffolding ringed it like reinforcements stitched to a wound. Turbines spun along the precipice, harvesting errant gusts. A cable bridge spanned the gorge, guarded by sentry towers. Solar mirrors angled skyward like metallic sunflowers. Eli gasped. "It's real." Hope, having stalked them whisper-footed across a continent, finally stepped into daylight. James's knees buckled, he gripped the boy's shoulders to steady himself. Beyond the bridge, distant figures in white hazmat cloaks moved with purpose and light. Somewhere beneath those cliffs lay hydroponic halls lit by honest bulbs, water untainted by ash, maybe even laughter unsullied by fear. James exhaled the long breath he'd been holding since the world ended. They had reached the gates, but gates opened 2 ways, and every single... The cable bridge sagged under the weight of forgotten years, but held firm beneath their footsteps, vibrating with a low harmonic that reminded James of cello strings bowed in a cavern. Steel grates clanged as he and Eli advanced, each clang ricocheting across the ravine to die against basalt walls mottled crimson by iron oxide runoff. Far below, a glacial river snarled, swollen by meltwater from radioactive snowfields, its froth faintly luminescent where isotopes danced with minerals. Midspan, sensors embedded in the railings snapped to life, red diodes swimming across their lenses to taste the newcomer's thermal signatures. James felt the scrutiny like ice pressed to his spine, but he kept his posture steady. Left boot, right boot, the revolver sealed beneath his coat like a secret oath. Ahead, a gatehouse jutted from the cliff face, once an auxiliary lab annex to the old observatory, now Meridian's primary checkpoint. Aluminum cladding fluttered where winds had fretted the seams, yet the portals themselves looked pristine. Twin doors of ballistic glass and composite plates, struts cross-laced like the iris of a great lens. Figures in white environmental cloaks emerged as the intruders neared. Sunlight diffused against laminated polymer, turning them into vague silhouettes capped by dark respirator masks shaped like elongated beaks. James tightened his grip on Eli's hand, whispering everything will be fine, a promise stuck somewhere between prayer and rehearsal. The lead sentinel raised a palm. The bridge's ground lights strobed yellow. "Stop there," a voice boomed, amplified by a vest-mounted piezo speaker. James halted, raised his other hand, elbows exposed to the chill wind. The mask's lenses mirrored his own reflection. Hollow-cheeked, grizzled jaw, ash still crusted along collar seams. An image of both threat and supplication. "Declare names," the sentinel ordered. "James Holloway," he said, throat rasping. "This is my son Elias. Age 8. A pause. A second sentinel stepped forward, cradling what appeared to be a handheld spectrometer. "Advance child first," the lead instructed. 3 paces. James knelt, met Eli's gaze. The boy nodded. Almost imperceptible repetition of a drill they'd practiced. "Obey quickly, speak little, watch everything." Eli shuffled 3 paces, the bridge plate groaning. The spectrometer wand traced arcs around his head and torso, its holoscreen spitting data glyphs too intricate for James to decipher. A soft chime, acceptable. "Father, advance." James complied. Sensor's word. He smelt ionized air. Another chime, lower pitch, then a beep escalating into a rapid alarm. The wand's hologram blossomed scarlet. The sentinel stiffened. Elevated isotopic load. Strontium, cesium, borderline. "I've had exposure," James admitted, pulse hammering. "Recent safe period. For days above threshold." "Borderline is not clearance," the sentinel replied. A third guard leveled what looked like a dart projector. "Deccan protocol's mandatory. The boy is admissible. The father will undergo chelation and isolation 12 hours minimum. You separate us, he won't comply," James warned, voice brittle. "We safeguard children, sir," the sentinel said, and the sincerity beneath the speaker's distortion cut deep. "But contamination protocols aren't negotiable." James scanned Eli, eyes wide, jaw clenched. Separation. The worst nightmare etched into long nights around tin can tripwires. Still, within the dome's shadow lay medicine. Shielding. Perhaps a tomorrow that was more than scavenged days strung together. He pressed the revolver into Eli's small hands, handle first. The boy's brows knit. James whispered, "Give it to them when I'm inside, not before." A code phrase laced with another meaning. Trust these people cautiously. He straightened, spread arms. "Do it." A hiss. Compressive foam enveloped him from a nozzle, cool and citrus-scented. Biopolymer beads embedded with chelating agents adhered like second skin. He gagged as it sealed his nose for a moment. Then a sentinel sliced nostril slits with a practiced scalpel gesture. "Good response," someone murmured. They steered him toward the right-hand door while Eli was led left, fingers brushing goodbye across the air. A fragile spark that bridged nothing. Inside, corridor lights bright as day slammed against James's pupils. He blinked, stepping through a negative pressure lock where jets blasted his coat, stripping ash into vacuum vents. Past another portal, the air shifted to sterile coolness tinged with oregano, trace of engineered microflora that metabolized volatile compounds. A medtech in gray smock directed him to a glass cubicle. Through its walls, he glimpsed dozens of similar rooms, some occupied by men or women wrapped in white foam like unfinished sculptures. Each sat motionless, eyes closed, the stillness of those who had risked everything and now could only endure the cost. A screen above the door flashed his stats. Rad ABS. Lifetime, 6.3 sieverts. EST bone load 40 becquerels per G. Beneath, a progress bar crawled toward green. The system predicted chelation success probability, 87%. James exhaled. He settled onto a polymer seat whose contour heated gently, drawing toxins through perspiration ports in the foam. Time flattened. Absence of threat felt disorienting. The hum of servos lulled him toward sleep. Memory seeped in, Carrie singing to infant Eli amid a power-out blackout. His own laugh when the lights returned and photosynthetic paint on hallway walls glowed talisman green. He clung to these fragments, unsure whether they anchored or drowned him. Somewhere in the cubicle array, someone sobbed. Elsewhere, a man recited numbers, primes perhaps, like a tether to rationality. A chime woke him. The bar reached green. Foam cracked, shedding like serpent skin. Automated arms brushed residue away, misted a neutralizing spray that tasted of mint and metal. The door slid open. A medic scanned him again, nodded once. Proceed to orientation hall. She handed him a badge. Temporary guest. On its back a map. Color lines tracking through the station's bowels. Meridian spanned deeper than he imagined. Levels carved into the mountain, hydroponic spires descending like inverted gardens. He followed yellow arrows, senses half dreaming until he reached a vast chamber where luminescent vines trellised across vaulted ceilings. Hundreds of newcomers sprawled on benches, cradling belongings. Children's laughter chimed from a corner where a projector cast holographic fish darting between invisible currents. Eli sat among them, wearing a fresh cotton tunic, his goggles replaced by clear safety shades. When he spotted James, he bounded over, relief bright enough to dwarf all auroras. James knelt. They wrapped arms around each other. He smelled soap in Eli's hair, a modest miracle after months of rationed water. "You okay?" the boy asked. James managed a crooked smile. "Better than okay." It almost felt true. A voice surged across hidden speakers. "Attention new arrivals. Orientation begins in 5 minutes. Please deposit weapons at the reception kiosk." The projector overlay directed them to a counter staffed by 2 guards and a table where rifles, machetes, and jury-rigged tasers lay tagged. Eli produced the revolver. The guard's eyebrows flicked. "Antique. Good metallurgy." James watched as it slid into a numbered bin, heart stuttering, but he reminded himself weapons had been for the road, and maybe, just maybe, the road was done. They joined a queue funneling into an amphitheater carved directly into bedrock. Seats curved around a central dais where a hologram shimmered. A spinning wireframe of Earth, its continents warped, coastlines swollen. A woman stepped onto the platform, late 30s, hair cropped short, wearing a charcoal jumpsuit embroidered with a stylized compass. She spoke without amplifier. The room's acoustic design carried her voice like spring water over stone. "Welcome to Meridian." She paused, letting the words settle. "I'm Dr. Irene Yusuf, Geothermic Systems Lead and Rotation Coordinator. You've traveled through chaos to reach these walls, and I assure you our mission honors that struggle." She gestured. The hologram zoomed to North America, a patchwork of scarlet hazard zones and pale green safe nodes. Meridian is one of 5 anchor sites in the reclamation network. We shelter, we heal, but above all, we prepare to rebuild. That promise requires rules. The map faded, replaced by a triad of icons. Health, resource, commitment. First, health. You've passed preliminary screening. Full viral and isotopic assays complete within 72 hours. Anyone exceeding thresholds will be treated. Non-responsive cases will be exiled. Murmurs rippled. Second, resource. Meridian runs on mutual labor. Expect assignment compatible with aptitude and conditioning. Children under 12 are exempt, but training begins early. Education wing level -3. She turned, gaze sweeping. Third, commitment. Outside these walls old banners, nation, profit, creed are fossils. Here we are singular, Meridian. Sabotage or theft equals expulsion. Violence yields the same. Her eyes carried weight beyond her lean frame, years of enforcement etched into posture. A hand rose in the rows above James. A weary man asked, "How long before the surface can sustain crops without hydro shelters?" Irene sighed, but her answer was measured. Estimates vary. With current stratospheric turbidity, open-air agriculture at this latitude remains lethal. We project 29 years to safe thresholds. Our job is to last those 29. A hush closed over the hall. Time stretched enormous across collective imagination. Sessions split. Medtechs guided groups toward dormitories. James and Eli were assigned to Quadrant C, Section 12, a narrow module with 2 bunks and a window slit overlooking interior gardens aglow with LED arrays. Fresh leaves, real green leaf, not pallid moss, wavered gently in controlled airflow. Eli stood speechless. James swallowed the lump of memory of grocery aisles once lined with produce. They toured communal facilities. Cafeteria, library etched into holographic archives, a recreation nook where survivors played something akin to Digital Go on recycled tablet glass. Everywhere, The hush of infrastructure thrummed. Geothermal turbines, water scrubbers, oxygen gardens. Systems fragile yet fiercely alive. In the cafeteria, they tasted their first meal. Lentil spirulina stew with carrot shavings, bread extruded from lab yeast. Flavors burst intense compared to travel rations. Eli giggled at the way carrot sweetness lingered. Nearby, a young woman introduced herself. May, former aerospace mechanic from the Pacific salvage fleets. She'd lost 2 fingers to frostbite, yet her grip was strong when she shook James's hand. Over dinner, she spoke of Meridian's ongoing project, launching stratospheric kites seeded with algae to scavenge CO2, a plan equal parts desperation and brilliance. Volunteers with mechanical aptitude were needed. James revealed his background, pre-war civil engineer turned infrastructure auditor. May's eyebrows lifted. "They'll move you straight into structural maintenance," she predicted. "The western pylons need reinforcement." As nights passed, routine crystallized. James reported to maintenance foreman, an ex-mining superintendent named Ortega, whose humor was black as slag. Ortega walked him through sensor readouts of microcracks in dome lattice, places where freeze-thaw cycles threatened catastrophic failure. James found solace in calculation. Numbers obeyed, unlike weather. Eli attended learning pods. Languages, history, applied hydroponics. He made friends. Twin girls born in a fallout shelter beneath Toronto. A boy who never spoke but whittled perfect birds from scrap polymers. Yet beneath Meridian's rhythm, tension coiled. Rumor webs spread at communal sinks. The reclaimer caravans had besieged another enclave 2 weeks south. Water yields from glacial wells dipped unexpectedly. A team repairing outer turbines glimpsed lights in the valley, watchers unknown. Dr. Yusuf convened an all-hands assembly, urging vigilance. "Meridian's cloak of obscurity thins," she warned. "We cannot be fortress and lighthouse both. Decisions await." One muggy dusk, James left the structural bay later than usual. He crossed the mezzanine where conduits glittered like veins beneath translucent flooring. Voices drifted from an adjacent auxiliary tunnel, Ortega arguing with someone James did not recognize. He slowed. "Dome integrity buys us time," Ortega insisted. "Yusuf wants to waste manpower on those kites, sky toys. We shore up first, innovate later." A second voice, youthful, clipped. "Atmosphere repairs the earth for us. Without sequestration we rot in our mountain tomb while storms outside sharpen claws." James considered revealing his presence, professional courtesy. Instead, curiosity rooted him. The voice argued passionately and Ortega retorted. Talk turned to vote counts inside the leadership council. Meridian's democracy, James realized, was tenuous. Footsteps approached. James blended into a maintenance alcove until they passed. Ortega and May, deep in dispute. James's pulse quickened. May, she had seemed friendly, but alliances here were fluid. He resolved to gather his own data before choosing sides. Back at the dorm, Eli sat cross-legged, studying a holographic field guide. "Did you know," he said without preamble, "they're trying to breed bees that can handle gamma spikes?" He flicked images of chunky, metal-banded pollinators. "They call them brassbacks." James sank onto the opposite bunk, exhaustion tugging. "Brave bugs." Eli closed the guide. "Dad, are we staying forever?" The question landed heavy. James looked at sterile ceiling panels, at lights engineered to mimic dawn. Every instinct screamed to keep moving, to deny complacency. But he heard his heartbeat, slower here, and recognized the yearning in his son's eyes. "We'll stay," he said, "so long as it's safe. Safe and honest." The caveat escaped before he could leash it. Days rolled. James reinforced pylons, studied blueprints, attended council forums where arguments crackled. He discovered Meridian's resource ledger, geothermal output plateauing, nutrient solution nearing depletion thresholds. Success of skykites wasn't indulgence. It was lifeline. Yet reinforcement of dome skeleton remained equally existential. Two truths pulling opposite. Dr. Yusuf took notice of his balanced perspective. One evening, she asked him to join a small advisory circle called Apex, a convergence of engineers, agronomists, and ethicists tasked with prioritizing resource allocations. He accepted, though apprehension coiled. Leadership painted targets. First Apex meeting convened in a chamber nicknamed the Lens, walls coated with smart glass projecting real-time data streams. Ortega represented structural faction. May represented aeronautical expansion. Others included Dr. Shin, specialist in gene-edited crops, and Father Quillo, a lanky priest-turned-cognitive scientist who mediated disputes with unsettling serenity. Yusuf opened. We have capacity for 1 grand initiative this quarter. Dome reinforcement requires 79 kilotons of composite we can fabricate from stock. Kite program needs same mass for tether spools plus drone arrays. She rotated to James. Independent assessment? He inhaled. Reinforcement buys certainty over present heads. Kites gamble on future atmosphere but demand structural piggyback anyway, because they mount to dome apex. Ideal scenario. Stage reinforcement in concert with kite anchor installation. Share material, labor. May's eyes lit. Ortega's scowl softened, common ground. Consensus formed to attempt hybrid schedule, though supply chains stretched thin. Work groups merged. James found himself bridging cultures. Eli watched from balconies, cheering when cranes hoisted the first kite anchor ring. A diamond lattice glinting beneath dome lights like spiderweb spun of stars. But cracks rarely vanish when ignored. One midnight a tremor rippled. An undermantle quake, magnitude 5. Sirens wrenched the station from slumber. James bolted, heart in throat. He reached the west quadrant to discover a supporting arch had sheared, raining shards that impaled hydroponic beds. Water sluiced across floor plates, shorting circuits. Emergency teams scrambled. James joined, sealing breaches with resin foam while agronomists raced to salvage roots. Over pandemonium, a technician shouted, "Radiation spike outside perimeter." Security feeds flickered onto handhelds. Silhouettes in lead-lined suits breaching outer gate. Reclaimer raiders exploiting quake chaos. Alarms howled. Defense turrets rotated. James dashed toward command nexus, nearly colliding with Yusuf. "Their inside sector B airlock," she panted, handing him a stun baton. "Protect Corridor 7 children's dorm wing." He sprinted. In fluorescent wash, he saw raiders cutting through secondary bulkhead, sparks flying. They carried electromagnetic nets and cattle prods, capture tools. James and 2 sentries formed a barricade, thigh-high water sloshing around boots. Raiders breached. A flashbang erupted, blanking senses. Through ringing ears, James swung baton, connecting with armor plating. Pain shot through wrist. He ignored it, drove forward. A raider lunged. Projectile net cascaded, electricity crackling. James ducked. The net snagged a ceiling pipe, dumping mist that hissed white. Settling smoke revealed 3 downed raiders, 1 fleeing. Sirens shifted pitch, intruder lockdown engaged. Automated shutters slammed, trapping the escapee in cross passage, where turrets hissed compressed fleshettes. Silence followed, deeper than guilt or relief. James sucked breath, adrenaline shaking marrow. Minutes later, Eli found him near dorm entrance, tears tracking grime on cheeks. "Thought they got you," he whispered. James clutched him hard enough to bruise. "I'm here," he muttered, though uncertainty gnawed. How many more raids before Meridian cracked like a tired bone? Council convened emergency summit. Fatalities: 2 engineers, 1 guard, several raiders. Hydroponic losses: 13% of crop yield, critical but survivable. Yet the wall between enclosed safety and external blight had thinned. Debates ignited. Expand armed patrols or cloak station deeper. Continue kite program or divert all to fortification. Voices rose, alliances frayed. James, voice quivering with exhaustion, proposed a bolder path. Engage raiders diplomatically. Offer limited trade medicine for raw or reduce incentive to breach. Gasped. Ortega sneered. May leaned forward. Yusuf weighed him. Father Quillo murmured, "Every exile remains a human resource squandered." The council deferred. In corridors, opinions polarized. Some hailed James as pragmatic. Others labeled him reckless. Eli heard whispers, returned to dorm upset. James knelt. "Progress always sounds dangerous to those comfortable with despair," he said, unsure if comforting or deluding. Repairs continued while politics churned. Eli excelled in classes, constructing miniature kite prototypes from scrap. One afternoon, he presented a design to May, microkites dispersing spore clouds to seed nitrogen-fixing bacteria. May beamed, promise to forward concept. James observed, pride swelling, and realized the boy was weaving himself into MERIDIAN's fabric faster than any decree could sever. Night again. James, restless, wandered catwalks. He found Yusuf in the lens, alone, hologram earth spinning, red zones pulsating. She rubbed temples. "We're one quake, one raid from cascade failure," she murmured. He joined her. "So what's the play?" She exhaled. "We push the hybrid project. Kites deploy in 6 weeks. If they work, atmospheric turbidity drops locally. Sunlight increases, external crops feasible sooner. We build redundancy." She turned, eyes glassy. "But first, we eliminate seams in our own house. I want you heading structural ops and security liaisons. Dual role." James blinked. "I'm an engineer, not a soldier. Tonight says otherwise." Her voice softened. "MERIDIAN needs bridges between steel and flesh, between caution and hope. You build bridges." He thought of the ravine bridge, sensors scanning him, the first barrier he crossed to reach this fragile arc. Building bridges meant bearing weight of everything that might cross. He nodded. "All right." Dawn smoldered beyond dome as repair crews resumed, their silhouettes dwarfed by lattice arcs. Eli watched from observation deck, brassback drones humming around his shoulders. He waved to his father descending via lift, hard hat reflecting first rays. James felt the mounting tension but also an undercurrent of collective will. Survivors forging civilization out of reactor ghosts. The station might fracture, storms might tear kites skyward in ribbons, raiders might return. But for the first time since atomic dawn, James glimpsed not just the possibility but the habit of tomorrow. He placed a hand on the main support girder, warm from floodlights, and started issuing commands. Welders sparked, drones lifted anchor plates, braces slid into place. Fissures of lavender twilight filtered through the dome's upper struts, tinting MERIDIAN's interior gardens in colors that never existed before the war. Somewhere beyond the composite shell, the outside world inhaled xenon-heavy air and exhaled long ribbons of caustic fog. But within these walls, every breath tasted faintly of basil. The fracture in Sector 12 West, once a hairline crack, now patched with carbon ceramic resin, stood as the simplest proof that careful hands could still reverse entropy. James found solace running his fingers across the cured seam, a ritual each dawn before shift change. If the surface of the patch remained satin smooth, no infiltration, no delamination, he could start the day believing repair was not just possible but perpetual. 6 weeks had collapsed into 4, and launch day for the stratospheric kites no longer glimmered on a distant calendar. It bore down like a sunrise too intense to look at. On catwalks above him, drones scurried, stringing ultra-thin photonic tether cable from the anchor rings to spools the size of freight cars. Each filament looked gossamer yet could haul 10 tons against gale shear. Only humans seemed fragile in comparison. Men and women dangling from harnesses, torque wrenches holstered like sidearms, arguing over torque specs and accents gathered from a world shattered into dialect islands. James wore 2 comm earpieces now, one linked to structural ops, one to security. Calls overlapped in a constant murmur. Spool 3 bearing oscillation rising, compensating with microlubricants, followed by North Sentinel post requesting guidance. Their thermal scopes just picked 3 unknowns cresting East Ridge. He'd adapted, compartmentalizing as he had during triage nights in the wasteland. Danger here, danger there, process everything, panic nowhere. He keyed security first. Copy Sentinel. Maintain line of sight, ping reclaimer patterns. Deploy non-lethal deterrence only. No gunfire unless invited. Council decree paired with James's own conviction. Almost immediately, Ortega's gruff bass barged over Channel 2. Non-lethal? You plan to tickle raiders into retreat. Until their intent's confirmed, we don't escalate, James replied, leveling his tone so hard it scraped calm from bone. Loose rounds punch more holes in our hull than any quake. Ortega muttered something about idealists before cutting off. The man had grudgingly accepted their shared project timeline, but trust welded thicker than alloy, and neither of them possessed the heat yet. James shifted attention to kite assembly. Anchor ring A7 reported misalignment. He jogged along a cantilevered walkway where May knelt beside a tension sensor, her prosthetic index finger unscrewing a cap with mechanical precision. She grinned as he approached. Morning, boss of all bridges. Sensors reading noise, not drift. Humidity's messing with the piezos. He crouched, making visual inspection while she recalibrated. The hush beneath turbine roar felt like conspiratorial peace. For days, she said quietly. Then we pull the sky a little closer. For sunrises, he echoed. Let's make sure it doesn't fall on us. May finished, wiped polymer grease across her trousers. You hear about the envoy? She asked. Envoy. His security inbox had been choked with status pings. He'd skimmed. Reclaimer caravan flagged down Scentpost Delta last night. One rider under white banner asked for parley. Council's meeting them tonight at the river sluice lock. She quirked an eyebrow. Your idea, remember? James straightened as if gravity spiked. I'll be there. Eli's midday lessons ended early because the lumens flickered twice, an automated signal that system batteries dipped below comfort range. He sprinted through nursery rows to find his father in structural ops, cheeks flushed with the thrill of childhood that still remembered carefree momentum. Brassbacks hatched, he blurted, thrusting out a palm-sized transparent cube riddled with hexagonal pockets. Inside, 3 metallic insects flexed microfoiled wings, sunlight glancing off alloy chitin. They look like jewelry, James said. One brassback butted the acrylic wall, clink-ringing miniature. That's Sawtooth, Eli declared. Likes testing fences. James tried to grin, but his mind already flitted to tonight's parley. He ruffled the boy's hair. Can you help May install pollen trays later? Yes, sir. Eli pivoted, then paused. You'll be at supper? Depends. Maybe late. The disappointment in those cobalt-ringed eyes stabbed. Big council thing, he added, but explanation rarely beat presence. Evening slid in lavender to charcoal gradients. At the sluice lock, steam rose where warm effluent met alpine air. Floodlights illuminated the meeting ground. A concrete apron littered with decontamination mats, flanked by 2 Meridian guards on one side and 3 reclaimers on the other. The reclaimers wore patchwork armor studded with photovoltaic shards. Masks rebreathe their snout like dragon muzzles. Between both parties stretched an area demarcated by white chalk lines. Neutral zone. Dr. Yusuf presided, cloak hood down, revealing sweat-matted curls. Ortega loomed at her right, arms folded into a barricade. May stood left, palms open beside a dolly stacked with crates labeled penicillin synth and vitamin culture packs. Peace offerings. James approached, receiving a curt nod. The reclaimer envoy stepped forward, removing helmet. She was young, maybe 19, skin scarred by windburn but eyes bright with fierce intelligence. Call me Lark, she said. We need meds. You need or fair. Yusuf gestured at crates. Antibiotics here, enough for your wounded. In return, we need unirradiated nickel and molybdenum from your mines. Raw form. Lark's jaw tightened. Clean ores deeper than we can dig without powered rigs. May pushed crate lids open, letting sterile smell drift. These can steady infections long enough to dig slower. Negotiations spiraled through contingencies. Number of crates, kilograms of ore, safe conduct corridors. James watched posture, not words, the way reclaimer sentries' shoulders sagged whenever antibiotics were mentioned. Desperation coaxed honesty. Still, Ortega whispered to James, they'll map us during the trade, come back with guns. Or we earn a buffer, James countered quietly. Starving neighbors raid. Healing neighbors knock. Agreement landed. 3 supply swaps at pre-marked drop sites. No weapons within 50 meters, each side accompanied by 2 observers. Lark sealed pact with the Meridian handshake. Right forearm gripped, left palm on each other's pulse. Yusuf mirrored. Electricity of hope surged, delicate as moth wings. In the corridor later, Ortega barked, "Your diplomacy just painted bull's eyes." James stifled fatigue. "So we build shields instead of thicker walls." Ortega's reply was a scoff tangled in doubt, but he followed to the lift anyway, as if argument kept them magnetized. Launch -2. Meridian buzzed like a beehive in crescendo. Children wove streamers from recycled nanofiber scraps to tether across catwalk rails. Good luck tales for the kites. Instructors let them because morale meant calories saved in psychosomatic uplift. James and May performed final dynamic load tests. At 80% simulated wind shear, anchor couplings hummed but held. Gyroscopic stabilizers in kite bellies spun up with a whine reminiscent of distant jet engines. Ghosts of aviation reborn. Eli, tasked with tagging braces with RFID chips for maintenance tracking, scampered across lattice grids like a monkey born to metal. Trouble threaded itself into good news. Geothermal coolant pressures oscillated unpredictably. Techs flagged microfractures in heat exchanger coil number 4, buried 200 meters below. A fix would require rerouting flow, reducing power output exactly when launch demanded peak capacity. James pored over schematics. Cooling bypass through coil number 2 could handle 90% load if they trimmed non-essential lux, recreation lighting, high-fidelity VR suites. Council-approved brownout. Residents tolerated dim evenings in exchange for a shot at sunlight. That night, still and silent, James walked perimeter catwalks. Fog pooled beneath the dome, swirling like milk in tea. Halfway around he noticed a flicker. Tiny red gleam against hull interior. Laser sight? No, just the reflection from a maintenance diode. He decided, but unease wormed. At dorm he found Eli asleep, hand clenched around toy glider. James collapsed on the lower bunk, but sleep ducked away. Thoughts looped. What if tethers snap? What if raiders ignore treaty? What if coil number 4 bursts mid-launch? Flooding station with scalding coolant. He tried to remember nights before fear became default. They felt fictional, like stories told at campfires where no one froze, no one glowed under Geiger wands. Launch day, sirens didn't blare. Instead, a melodic chime echoed through every hall, signal of history pivoting. Residents filed to balconies, helmets in hand, eyes tipped upward. The kites rested in folded stasis, each the scale of a pre-war passenger jet but appearing weightless, skeletal frames of graphene matrices and mylar sails painted iridescent green for maximum chlorophyll mimicry. Sunlight through the dome cut them into stained glass dragons. Yusuf's voice filled comm lines. Initiating pre-roll. All non-essential personnel clear to observation distance. James manned ops deck alongside May, Ortega, and 3 automation specialists. Monitors displayed wind vectors, tether tension, coil readouts. At 9 o'clock hours, blast vents opened in the roof pedals. One by one, pedals peeled back, exposing the interior to raw sky for the first time in Meridian's history. A chorus of gasps arose from below as gray clouds glowered overhead like curious giants. Wind shear within envelope, Ortega confirmed. Tethers unlocked. Kite 1, ignition, May called, pressing her palm to biometrically keyed pad. In the launch bay, compressed gas thrusters hissed. The first kite surged upward, wings blooming to full span. Tether paying out with a were so delicate it sounded like parchment torn by careful fingers. The craft punched through mist, climbing. Sensors relayed altitude, 1 kilometer, 2, 10. Inside Meridian, the light changed. Diffuse gloom gave way to a shaft of warm radiance as the kite's reflective underbelly bounced solar energy into the aperture ring. Photonic cells along inner dome absorbed, converting brilliance into electricity and photosynthetically active wavelengths. Gardens exhaled a sigh audible only in chloroplasts. Kite 2, 3, 4 followed. Cheers morphed into a swell of exultation that rattled girders more than any quake ever had. James felt tears, first in years, sting salt into weld burns. He clapped May's shoulder. She hooped like a child. Eli, on an upper balcony, yelled down comms. "Dad, light feels warm." James responded with choked laughter. Then warning sirens shredded euphoria. Security feed flashed crimson. Motion perimeter breach, East Ridge. Multiple heat signatures sprinted across screen. A voice, sent post-beta, shouted, "Not Reclaimer ID. Repeat, hostile unknowns." Ops deck snapped into kinetic ballet. Ortega barked orders. Turrets pivoted. James glimpsed screens. Figures in matte black suits, low cross-sections, military exos. He toggled to telescopic cam. Helmets bore no symbols. They carried breaching plasma lances, outdated but deadly. May cursed. Mercenaries. Weapons free. Ortega demanded. Yusuf over master channel. Repel. Preserve dome at all costs. The raiders, whoever they were, spread into arrowhead formation, driving toward half-open roof pedals. They must have tracked launch prep and chosen the moment of maximal distraction. James donned tactical harness, grabbed a sonic pulse rifle, non-lethal yet organ-rattling, and sprinted for lift. Corridors churned with evac orders. Eli's class herded to lower shelter modules. Brassback containment automatically sealed. Code orange klaxons strobed. James joined defense line at upper pedal maintenance bay. Through ruptured roof, he saw shapes scaling anchor spokes, trying to cut tethers. Cutting even one would fling the kite loose, cable whipping through the dome like a scythe. He raised pulse rifle, fired. A translucent shockwave rippled, catching a climber mid-stride. The figure convulsed, slipped, tumbled into darkness. Return fire. A bolt of coherent microwave licked the railing near his head, paint blistering along with skin on his cheek. He gritted teeth, advanced. May's voice over comm. "Anchor ring A7 compromised. I need cover to reseal." James spotted her silhouette below, sprinting across catwalks with a resin pack. Two intruders rappelled toward her. He vaulted a service ladder, sliding down rails to intercept. One attacker lunged. James parried with rifle stock, firing point blank. The shockwave pulped the Exo's gyro stabilizers. Enemy collapsed, armor sparking. Second swung plasma lance. James ducked, momentum carrying him into center mast where his ribs cracked protest. Pain white-hot, he headbutted into the attacker's visor. Plexi spider-webbed. May arrived, driving her tool into foe's spinal port, discharging capacitor jolt that felled them. Together they reached anchor. Severed stabilizer bolts dangled. Kite above oscillated, sail shaking, tether tension spiking. If it snaps, May started. No snap. James cinched himself to ring, began threading replacement bolt through shattered flange while May injected expanding resin. Alarms shrieked. Another intruder clambered over beam, but Ortega's wrought iron bellow resounded and a flechette pinged the Exo's visor, sending attacker careening. Bolt seated, torque wrench clicked. May's resin foamed. Set. Tension subside reading. Nominal. They exhaled. Elsewhere, defense turrets routed remaining hostiles. Feed showed black suit survivors retreating into fog, dragging wounded. Meridian's hull bore scorch marks and 2 minor punctures. Automated swarms sealed leaks with plug drones. Not perfect, but standing. Hours later, triage ward buzzed. James' sides strapped with compression mesh. Yusuf debriefed. Unknown faction. Tech traces suggest private security contractor from pre-war corporate vaults. Motive likely to hijack kite tech or ransom station. Raiders repelled, but Meridian's anonymity evaporated. Council assembled while medics still wiped blood from floors. Arguments flared hotter than plasma lances, some shouting for immediate counterstrike, others for lockdown deeper underground. James, voice ragged, proposed a third way. Deploy kites as mobile beacons, extend light and surveillance across valleys to deter incursions, while forging wider trade network including reclaimers for mutual defense. May added that kites could relay comms, boosting radio to reach other anchor sites. Unity meant strength. Ortega bristled but paused. He'd seen firsthand the intruder's sophistication. Fighting alone was attrition suicide. Father Quillo spoke last, quoting an ancient lamentation about cities hidden under baskets. Light belongs on hilltops, lest darkness multiply unchallenged. The phrase drifted like incense, leaving silence roomy enough for consensus. Council voted. Unanimous for outreach, conditional on fortifying coolant coil number 4 and expanding drone sentry net. James named Director of External Affairs in addition to his roles. Not even irony remained to laugh. First broadcast pulsed next dawn. Meridian calling anchor nodes Ararat, Sagan, Liue, Nuke. Static answered, then faint human syllables, fragile spider silk flung across stratosphere. Connections would take weeks to stabilize, but voices existed. In the gardens, Eli released a jar of juvenile brassbacks. They whirred up toward opened petals, glittering in new sunlight reflected from kite sails. They'll pollinate whatever's left out there, he said. James crouched, wincing, ribs still sore. Or build something new. He watched insects disappear, felt fresh star heat stroke his neck, smelled leaves edging toward honest sweetness. Meridian had survived a birthquake, a raid, and a dawn of terror. Now it pulsed with an audacious plan. To glow brighter, not shrink. He stood, gaze drifting to kite tethers slanting into boundless haze, thin lines mooring possibility. He wasn't fool enough to think danger had relented, but he understood. Wind arrived scented with promises no Geiger counter could measure, threading through Meridian's open roof petals and stirring the banners children had woven from mylar scraps during the anxious lull between attacks. 5 kites now rode the stratospheric tides, 5 taut lines humming as Earth's jagged breath tugged at them, each kite a skeletal lantern filled with chemically coaxed algae, each casting solar spill into the heart of the station. Below, hydroponic terraces glittered emerald instead of pallid gray, and on the garden mezzanine James Holloway paused to feel that improbable warmth seep through scar tissue across his cheek. 50 meters away his son Eli darted among trellis beans, calibrating pollinator perches for the next generation of brassbacks. The boy's laughter ricocheted off carbon ceramic ribs and mingled with the deeper voice of turbines, creating a chord James had started to think of as Meridian's pulse. It was the sound of almost enough. Not quite enough. In the 6 weeks since the assault, every monitor in ops had pulsed hazards like arrhythmias, supply graphs dipping toward critical, seismic sensors jittering, radiation plumes flickering outside like phantom campfires. The unknown attackers never returned, but their absence weighed more heavily than bullets. Absence meant planning, regrouping, perhaps reinforcements armed with corporate vault blueprints and old grudges. Meanwhile, faint radio responses from anchor sites trickled in, static-laced syllables, coordinates, urgent requests for medical dossiers. Ararat reported a fungal blight in its anaerobic corn vats. Nuke replied with a single word, learning before vanishing into hiss. Communication had become the new frontier, fragile as spider silk strung between skyscraper ruins. Tonight Meridian would gamble again. Dr. Yusuf's task force had retrofitted one of the defense drones into a courier craft no larger than a table, then loaded it with copper filaments that could mesh into a broadband dish once it reached orbit altitude. The drone's designation, Heron, honored the egret James and Eli had seen during their pilgrimage. If Heron succeeded, the reclamation network could share not just patchwork distress calls but real-time data, seed libraries, structural algorithms, maybe even music somebody had saved on an ancient drive. If Heron failed, Meridian would lose half its strategic drone fleet and invite whatever predators sniffed the launch's telltale heat signature. James now carried triple roles: Director of Structural Ops, Liaison to External Affairs, and representative of Meridian's newly forged Defense Integration Council. A mouthful that felt less like prestige and more like a set of rail spikes hammered through his calendar. But leadership still required the small rituals, so he set aside data-ad diagnostics and joined the midday meal queue where stewards ladled carrot spirulina soup into cellulose bowls. Eli slid in beside him, cheeks sunburned where goggles didn't reach. Sawtooth escaped, the boy confessed, referencing his favorite braback. I think it wants to map the vents. James swallowed a smile. Then we'll follow its map. They ate leaning against a balustrade above the central courtyard while crowds below rehearsed emergency drills, shoulders brushing, laughter flaring despite fatigue. Meridian's morale had mutated into something tougher than optimism, a granite faith in actionable miracles. Late afternoon delivered complications. An encrypted packet crackled across the long-range band, the Reclaimer faction's scout lark hailing from drop site 3, voice tight with wind. Meridian, urgent, convoy pinned 5 clicks north of you, unknown hostiles in exo armor. Need safe passage to your perimeter. We carry or Patriti. Please respond. James double-checked ID code. Genuine. Council session convened within minutes via VR nodes. Ghostly avatars flickered in the lens chamber. Ortega argued that opening gates mid-launch risked infiltration again. May countered that abandoning allies would prove every cynical prophecy raiders held. Yusuf's gaze cut through the haze. We aid, she concluded, but under controlled corridor with aerial drones. James volunteered to lead the extraction team because diplomacy worked best when anchored in gratitude owed personally. Ortega insisted on going too to make sure your open doors don't become revolving ones. May would remain to direct Heron's countdown. Dusk bled iron against the stratosphere as armored buggies rolled from the west portal, electric motors whispering. James rode shotgun in the lead vehicle, sonic rifle across lap, unfamiliar weight of command stitching nerves together. Eli had begged to come, but James invoked parental veto. The boy's frown still smoldered behind his thoughts as the gate clanged shut. Beyond Meridian, the forest looked marginally less malign beneath planet lamp flames. Kite's underbellies reflected far enough that some trees regained ghost green tint. But shadows remained thick, and as the convoy crested frost-crusted scree, James spotted pulses of muzzle flashes ahead, white phosphor arcs painting silhouettes. He thumbed comm. Lark, hold bearing, we're inbound. They arrived to chaos, 3 reclaimer trucks blocked by toppled deadwood, their armored outriders exchanging fire with half a dozen exoclad troopers, same matte black as the faction that had attacked the station. James ordered suppressive bursts from roof turret speakers, low-frequency concussion waves. Leaves shuddered, black suits stumbled. Ortega's gunners deployed net mines, 2 troopers snared, exos crackling as capacitors overloaded. Lark popped from behind a truck cab, her photovoltaic armor cracked but smile unbroken. Knew you'd come. James jumped down, covering her retreat. As reclaimers transferred or crates onto Meridian platform lifts, a stray plasma bolt sliced across James's forearm, searing cloth to flesh. Pain registered like cold water. He dove behind the buggy, regained footing, fired twin sonic pulses that shattered an attacker's faceplate. The trooper reeled, revealing a woman's face beneath, skin blistered, eyes feral with cobalt hunger, and for a heartbeat James saw not an enemy but another survivor flailing against extinction. Then Ortega shouted, incoming cluster, and the forest erupted in concussive thunder. Explosives flung splinters. James herded Lark and her crew onto the transports, engines screamed, convoy reversed course in a hail of sparks. Pursuit dwindled when Meridian's perimeter drones swarmed, strobing ultraviolet disruptors. The exosuits vanished into undergrowth, leaving only charred footprints and a knot of questions. Back within walls, the transfers zipped through decontamination tunnels. Lark limped to Mebe, refusing stretcher until she pressed a token of thanks, an iron coin depicting intertwined hands, into James's blood-spattered palm. From my tribe's forge, she said. Proof trust can be hammered too. James hardly slept after physicians sealed his forearm burn. He limped to launch control where May monitored Heron's pre-ignition countdown. T-10:00. Your arm, she asked, voicing equal parts reprimand and relief. Functional. He watched engineers check thruster gimbals. Coil number 4's pressure line held steady at 94%, the brownout had bought headroom. Yet James felt another pressure, the moral calculus of battle. Had he chosen the right vector? Killing or capturing those troopers did not answer why they attacked or who commanded them. At T-00, Yusuf entered bearing a tablet. Intercepted chatter from enemy suits, she announced. They broadcast telemetry to a repeater labeled Helix. Ortega's scowl deepened, May's eyelids flickered fear. Everyone knew the ghost stories of Helix, a pre-war biotech conglomerate whose executives fled into a continental bunker arcology once the nukes fell, rumored to emerge only to seize cutting-edge salvage. If Helix existed, their appetite for kites and algae tech would equal Meridian's need to defend it. We're not ready for a siege, Ortega stated. Then we make allies ready, James answered, surprising himself with firmness. Heron's dish means shared defenses, shared warnings. We must launch. The countdown reached final 60 seconds. On observation decks, families gathered in hushed clusters. Eli stood up front gripping a brassback perch cage, empty save for Sawtooth. The insect twitched wings as though sensing history. 30, May intoned. Exterior floodlights winked. Heron extended heat tiles, micro thrusters spooling. 10. Steam vented snow. 5. Silence swallowed breath. Ignition. The launch tube trembled, 0-point capacitors discharged, Heron shot skyward in a lance of glorious blue. Kids shrieked delight, elders clasped hands, James felt tears again. The drone cleared pedals, hit troposphere, sensors ticked altitude 20 kilometers, 25. Comms crackled, guidance nominal. Deploying dish in 30. May grinned ferociously. Then static detonated across every screen. Heron's telemetry vanished. Ops hollered queries, no response. A new signal overrode, strong, deliberate, an icon, a double helix coil rotating in red. A voice filtered through auto speakers, velvet over razors. Meridian Station. You possess assets critical to Earth's renewal. Stand by for acquisition. Compliance yields integration and resource parity. Non-compliance invites neutralization. The icon flickered out. In its place, high-altitude cameras showed Heron drifting, tail plume severed, dish undeployed. Around it, 3 dark arrowheads whirled, guided missiles disguised as meteors. One missile streaked downward, not toward Heron but toward Meridian. Yusuf shouted, intercept sequence. Turrets reoriented, anti-missile coils fired tungsten rods that pierced the sky in glittering spears. The missile juked, AI swarming. A rod found its brain, detonating in ultraviolet bloom 10 kilometers above, but shockwave thunder rolled across domes seconds later, rattling anchors. Kite tethers quivered like bowstrings, interior lighting flickered as capacitance drained to shield arrays. Heron spiraled lower, autopilot fighting. May worked console, fingers a blur. If we lose her, orbit grid dead before birth. She rerouted thruster banks, Heron answered, stabilizing long enough to unfold dish pedals. Data burst pinged, then again, live. Even crippled, Heron linked, the dish woke, handshake with Meridian's receiver established vector pathways to other nodes. Before the drone could transmit more, a second missile finished the kill. Heron's feed cut to obsidian, debris blossomed like a black flower, then streaked into stratospheric slipstreams and vanished. Silence saturated ops. James inhaled. Dish handshake confirmed. At least some bits escaped. May wiped eyes, resolve forging anew. Ortega paced. Helix knows our range now. They'll come groundside. We anticipate, Yusuf said. Council votes tonight on immediate coalition with reclaimer settlements. We share power cells, they lend fighters. But James heard a different urgency. Walls alone would never suffice. Meridian needed mobility, redundancy, maybe even an evacuation protocol. Vision flickered of children again on broken roads, but he suppressed it. One step at a time. The vote passed. Reclaimer leader Tariq, Lark's superior, arrived 3 days later on a skimmer heavy with ore and wounded. Joint training began, Meridian medics teaching advanced triage, Reclaimer scouts guiding subterranean navigation maps beneath Helix approach corridors. Eli watched drills, absorbing every maneuver as if play. He coaxed brassbacks to ferry fiber optic threads between outlying watchtowers, creating a mesh network invisible to radar. Sawtooth became first courier, diving through access fence with uncanny precision. Helix's first terrestrial push came under cover of monsoon night, 2 weeks post-Heron. Fog-blanketed valleys, kites reflected glow diffused. Meridian's new watchmesh caught them, a column of exo-troopers flanked by crawling drones the size of wolves, composite jaws bristling sensor whiskers. Security net triggered silent alarm, defense turrets pivoted but held fire per James's directive, let Helix cross predetermined kill box. Reclaimer snipers perched in crags, sonic rifles tuned to rupture exo-joint hydraulics. James manned central command, arm fully healed save pale scar. Eli hovered beside maps, transmitting brass-back telemetry loops. Ortega, field commander, barked terse updates. At 3:12 the column hit the kill box, an old riverbed seeded with electromagnetic mines derived from kite capacitors. Metal screamed as charges inverted polarity, exosuits seized, joints locking. Snipers opened, troopers toppled. Helix drones leapt, severing snare cables with plasma mandibles. Some mines misfired, gaps opened, a handful of suits surged forward, lances glowing. Meridian's gate guns erupted flechettes but Helix's point defense screens deflected. The suits reached outer pylons. Plasteel claws bit into support braces, prying. James cursed. Losing a pylon mid-fight risked dome collapse. Deploy brassback swarm, Eli urged suddenly. That's for communication, not combat, James said. They hate high-frequency bursts, brassbacks can carry jammers. The boy had tested in nursery, recorded drone repulsion. Moment left to choose. James gave nod. Eli dashed to microaviary where dozens of brassbacks had grown. Engineers strapped coin-sized jammers to insect thoraxes, keyed to resonate at exosonic frequencies. Gates opened hatches, a cloud of living shrapnel burst into the night, whirring like a silver storm. They homed on helix suits, magnets guiding. At proximity, the jammers pulsed shrill oscillations. Exo-auditory sensors overloaded, suits AI glitching. Troopers reeled, some collapsing, tearing helmets free to relieve sonic agony, making them vulnerable to air toxins. Within minutes, resistance folded. Survivors retreated, leaving drones to drag the incapacitated. Victory rang raw, not triumphant. Medics still hauled dead reclaimer snipers, and scorched trees smoldered. Yet Helix's first ground assault failed. Council convened at dawn. Yusuf summarized, "We have weeks, maybe months before Helix escalates." They would escalate satellite kinetic rods, nerve agents. Yusuf leaned on lectern, "We need relocation redundancy. Portable Meridian." James felt gears aligned to his earlier fear. Blueprint sketches emerged for migratory stations anchored by kite arrays, hubs that could detach modules and relocate along rails or maglev corpses. He found himself nominated to design structural interfaces. Across weeks, James barely slept, but exhilaration propelled him. Teams cannibalized and used cargo pods, outfitted them with fold-out walls, climate bladders. Eli automated brassback routing to track detachable corridors. May adapted kite anchor winches into sky cranes able to hoist pods across ravines. Helix's next message arrived via explosive courier, a missile that ruptured just shy of dome, scattering thousands of leaflets printed on ballistic polymer, integration or erasure. Propaganda included diagrams of Helix arcologies, abundant farms, and genetic clinics, utopia for those who surrendered tech patents. People wavered, some argued capitulation. Ortega and May publicly burned leaflets, but fear lingered. James visited the barracks where dissent brewed. He spoke not of resistance but of belonging, how Meridian had turned wasteland into music of turbines, how every weld held someone's story. He produced the iron coin from Lark and passed it around. "Trust is hammered," he said, "but only if the fire is hotter than doubt." When he left, the barracks hummed less with defeat. The final confrontation chose its own hour, midday, when a rare sunbeam sliced clouds unobstructed. Helix launched kinetic rods from low-orbit, telephone pole tungsten darts descending at Mach 10. Meridian's early warning astrophotography, courtesy of allied node Sagan, caught silhouettes minutes before impact. Only 2 defense plumes remained with enough propellant for intercept. James, May, Ortega, Yusuf clustered in ops. Calculation spat grim. Intercept probability 43%. Missing meant crater. James heard Eli's voice behind, quiet. "What if kites deflect?" They turned. The boy explained, tethers anchored to winches could pivot sails, creating ablation screen. Kite material, graphene matrix, could shear rods, bleeding velocity before they touch dome. Risk, severed tethers whipping lethal inside. Yusuf computed aloud, cutaway mode, manual trigger midair, sails spread perpendicular. Ortega objected but data persuaded. Decision locked. Alarms blared, civilians evacuated to lower strata. James, May, and drone pilots hauled winch overrides. At command, Eli interfaced jam consoles, though he should have been in shelter. James wanted to protest, but time melted. Kites slewed, tethers groaning. Graphene wings angled, forming V-shapes aimed at descending streaks. Sky ripped. First rod hit Kite 2. Sail flared white, shredding. Rod split into molten spray, fragments peppered valley beyond. Tether snapped. Recoil whiplashed along rings, autoknife severed remainder before it pierced dome. Crew ducked, shards sang overhead. Second rod tore through Kite 4, but impulse dampened enough that residual shaft slammed into basalt cliff, carving glacier spray but sparing station. Dust mushroomed like miniature nuke, yet sensors read safe. Ops silent except coughs of disbelief. 2 kites lost, but Meridian still stood. Rods spent. Before relief settled, new blips, troop dropships inbound. Helix doubling down, counting on station weakened. James's voice fractured but held, activate migration protocol alpha. Pods detach, move out. We hold departure lane. Ortega, eyes glazed, nodded, the pragmatic titan. Port doors irised open, train of mobile pods rolled, drawn by electric tractors along refurbished maglev line. Families packed inside greenhouses lit by backup batteries. Reclaimer fighters flanked column. Station core remained to cover exit. Command skeleton crew manned turrets, May, Yusuf, Ortega, James. Eli refused to leave father. Yusuf relented, assigning him to brass back support. Dropships disgorged exo platoons. Battle-like reprises, sonic rifles, flechettes, brass back jammers. But this time, Helix troopers sported counter-oscillation shields. Jammers fizzled. Drones lunged, tail lasers slicing. James realized static defense would break. He climbed damaged kite tether winch, feverish plan sprouting. They still controlled 2 kites. If he unspooled tether and attached counterweight, say a fuel cell cluster, he could swing it like orbital bola across dropship altitude. Crazy, May hissed when he radioed idea. Better than dead, he shot back. She rerouted power, Ortega risked lift aperture. James rigged explosive counterweight, hammered release. Motor whined, tether uncoiled, dragging cell cluster outward. He timed rotation, then triggered explosive shear. The cluster flew wide arc, tether trailing. Dropship attempted climb, cluster detonated proximity, shrapnel puncturing thrusters. Vessel veered, crashed into ridge. Others pulled back, armor shredded by own debris. Ground troopers, seeing air cover gone and migration underway, faltered. Reclaimer squads pressed, corralled prisoners. Battle ended not with explosion but with ragged cheers and the hum of departing pods. Hours later, Meridian's core, domeless after sacrificing pedals to intercept, stood gutted but victorious. Remaining crew boarded last mobile columns. They left ruins behind, but front car's windshield already glowed with dawn refracted through surviving kites lofted ahead as scouts. Pathways of light. In a cabin retrofitted as command, Eli curled against James. "We're homeless," the boy murmured. James stroked his hair. "We're frontierless," he corrected gently. "Any place we stop and mend becomes Meridian again." Outside, rails cut through meadows where snow retreated, leaving shy sprouts poking. Brassbacks lingered above convoy, their metal wings heliographing unknown alphabets to future readers. Night later, they halted beside a river untainted enough for fishing. Pods unfurled into temporary villages. Reclaimers and Meridian engineers pitched tents of woven kite silk under constellations recalibrated by war yet still beautiful. James climbed ridge, May joined, gesture stiff but smile easy. Below, lights twinkled, modular streets. Children's voices drifted, unfrightened. "Portable Meridian," May said, exhaling. "First of many," James answered, feeling weight lift, not because danger vanished but because burden now spread across a caravan of hearts beating in rough sync. They would rebuild domes, relaunch kites, maybe even reclaim oceans. Earth's wounds were ragged, but scars could support new skin. He sensed Eli at path's bend, pointing skyward. A meteor arced, a peaceful one, burning harmless. The boy's cobalt-ringed eyes reflected hope no longer theoretical. James placed the iron trust coin in Eli's palm. "You'll need to forge more of these," he whispered. Eli closed fingers around it, metal warm from his father's hand. Down in camp, a makeshift speaker crackled alive. Somebody found an ancient song, vinyl digitized, horns swinging. James laughed, a sound rusty yet vibrant, and descended to join the dance, limbs aching but spirit electric. Far overhead, 2 remaining kites hovered.